People are going to say I'm hating, but there is nothing to hate on about anybody I'm going to talk about in this video.
One of my favorite comedians working today. Make some noise for the great Ty Rivera, everybody.
But the thing with Joe,
yeah,
is I don't know that we have a lot to talk about because
you're both horrible at stand-up. What are you guys going to talk about? Who had a worse special? And I know that Marc Maron has been going to every podcast he can go to, supposedly to promote his special, but all he's doing is talking shit about everybody. And it's because his special is that terrible. If I had a special that terrible, I would want to talk about everything but the special too. And I know some people say that he did a good impression of Theo Von, and it was a funny impression of Theo Von, but that's all he had. I tried to watch his special, and his special was so bad that I sat down to watch it wide awake, and then I ended up falling asleep. I don't even think I made it halfway through. And when I woke up, I had no interest in going back to see what I had missed. That's how terrible his special was. His special was basically like a really long Facebook post with no punchlines at all. And I say Facebook for a reason, because it was a boomer style rant about Donald Trump, which I'm the kind of person, I love stand-up so much that somebody can do jokes about things that are the complete opposite of what I actually believe. And if they're funny, I'm gonna laugh. That's how much I love stand-up. And for anybody that's gonna be like, well, what would you know? I have been doing stand-up comedy for 22 years. I was a paid regular at the Mothership in Austin. I was a paid regular at every single club in LA except the Comedy Store, because all of their bookers were bullshit, and that's 100% true. And anybody that knows LA comedy will tell you that. I definitely should have been a regular at the Comedy Store. I was an unpaid regular there, to be completely clear, which means you're in development. When it comes to Mothership, for anybody who doesn't know, I performed in both rooms of the Mothership. I would kill it there regularly. Anybody that knows the Austin scene knows I was all over the Austin scene. I've been a guest on Kill Tony 3 times.
Two of my favorite comedians, two people that I've waited a long time to have as guests on this show. Make some noise for the great Ian Fidance and Ty Rivera, everybody. Monster comedians. We're lucky to have them here in Austin. Welcome, my friends, Brian Moses and Ty Rivera. Yep. The creator of Roast Battle, Ty Rivera, touring with Tim Dillon. Come on in, make yourselves at home. I've been performing with this guy since we were doing open mics together in LA 16 years ago, waiting out under the sun in the daytime to basically perform in front of each other. Now he's a monster. He lives here in Austin, Texas. I've waited a long time to have him on solo. One of our favorite guests of all time, one of my favorite comedians working today. Make some noise for the great Ty Rivera, everybody. Ty Rivera.
So it's not like I don't know what I'm talking about, and people are going to say I'm hating, but there is nothing to hate on about anybody I'm going to talk about in this video. Marc Maron sucks, and so does Joe Rogan and his crew when it comes to actual stand-up. Marc Maron is only bitter because Joe Rogan eclipsed him, not only in stand-up comedy, but podcasting. And having Joe Rogan eclipse you in stand-up comedy has got to be a bitter pill to swallow. What's up, everybody? Ty Rivera here, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world. All right, so I think part of the reason that I wanted to cover this was because when I watched it, it actually got on my nerves a little bit, because I had to wonder whether or not the narrator of this channel, American Redact, was actually feeling like Marc Maron is good at stand-up and does have valid points, or if he just agrees with him politically, so he wants to side with him. Because it would either have to be that, or that he doesn't actually know what good stand-up is, or the level of free speech and free thought it takes in order to be a stand-up. And I couldn't figure out exactly what was what, because he seems to believe in that punching up versus punching down, and he seems to think that Marc Maron is saying some things that are important. And while Marc Maron may be saying some stuff that's important, he's saying it for the wrong reasons. It really is coming from Marc Maron being an actual hater and being bitter. Marc Maron has been bitter all the way back to the Dane Cook days. And while, like I said, I was a paid regular at the Mothership, and I was all over Austin, and I was all over LA, and then for a while I was in Vegas. I've done comedy everywhere. I've been on the road like crazy, but I've never been unfunny enough to be on a show with Marc Maron. And some people are going to think I'm joking or being shady when I say that, but I'm really not. It's Marc Maron was always on terrible shows because the shows have to be terrible in order for Marc Maron to look like he's funny. Marc Maron is what's called an alt comic, and alt comedy had its run in LA. When I left LA, it was because I was tired of alt comedy and I was tired of the way that worked. And I would get on their shows and I would kill it on their shows. But then the next day I would wake up to somebody writing a really long Facebook post or a blog about me, and it would be another comedian of all things. They're the ones who originally tried to cancel Dave Chappelle. A lot of people don't realize this, but before Dave Chappelle had people trying to cancel him from the LGBT community, Dave Chappelle had gone to do a set at, I believe it was Meltdown Comics, which was where they had a really hot show in the back of Meltdown Comics on Sunset. And so Dave Chappelle dropped in to do a quick set, and they started this whole campaign to cancel Dave Chappelle because he had said a bunch of stuff that was transphobic. And that was before, like I said, Dave Chappelle got in trouble over Netflix. And when I say got in trouble, nothing ever really happened to Dave, but they did try to start an entire controversy. That was the alt scene that was doing that. And when I said that people were writing blogs about me or Facebook post about me, it wasn't audience members that were upset with what I said. It was other comedians, alt comedians, that almost all of them are gone. But Marc Maron was one of the main people really trying to put these on. And that's what bothers me about what he's saying in this particular video, or in the 2 interviews that he's done that this is pulled from, is he has, like I said, the right intentions in calling Joe out, because Joe and his crew suck because they only want people around them to get so good. And that's because they know that that's going to make them look worse. That's going to make them look like the amateurs they are when it comes to actual stand-up, which I know some people are going to get mad and be like, I love Kill Tony. I don't care who you love. When it comes down to actual stand-up, everybody knows Tony Hinchcliffe sucks. Joe Rogan sucks. That's why Joe Rogan's special, Burn the Boats, was absolutely terrible, which I did a review about that. And everything I said was 100% true. And the other way you guys should know that I'm not just some full of shit crazy person talking on the internet is you never hear any of these people that all do know me. Tim Dillon knows me. Brian Simpson knows me. Joe Rogan knows me. Tony Hinchcliffe knows me. Anybody that you're going to pull out of your Andrew Santino, Bobby Lee. Bobby Lee says he doesn't know me, but Bobby Lee's been doing the same set for 20 years. So I know him well enough to know that. That's why Bobby Lee has never done a special, is because if he does a special, he'll have nothing left because he's been doing the same set for 20 years. That impression of his dad and everything he does is old. It's all old material because Bobby Lee is not a writer. Bobby Lee is more of an actor than a stand-up, even though he does stand-up. Andrew Santino, I've known forever. I did one of his first shows that he put on, and I think it was in Culver City, and he had me come out to do it. But Andrew Santino is cool. But like all these guys that I'm going to talk about, I actually know, and they know me. And so if anybody wanted to shut it down, Theo Von, I know Theo Von too. He asked me for my information one time because I think he was looking for someone to go on the road with, like someone to take on the road. But this was like a long time ago. And I accidentally gave him one of my fan cards instead of one of my actual business cards that had my phone number on it. But it is what it is, and life is what it is. And last time I saw Theo, we were cool. It's like if anybody really wanted to shut me down, they would just come out and say I wasn't funny, or I wasn't good at what I do, or I was lying. But you notice nobody's ever done that. And I made a whole video about mothership and the way that Joe calls it a meritocracy, but it's not. It's not at all. If it were an actual meritocracy, Joe and Tony would have had to sit some time out already. And the reason that that club is so perfect, because mothership, and understand, I've performed a lot in both rooms. For regular shows, for Roast Battle, featured for Tim Dillon more than once in the big room. Roast Battle was always in the big room. A lot of shows in Little Boy, which is the small room. So I know what I'm talking about, and people know me too, but a lot of people won't actually acknowledge the things I say because to acknowledge them will call attention to them, and I'm going to do nothing but tell you guys the truth about everything, just like I have so far. Stand-up is the only thing I love. Stand-up is the thing that I am best at out of everything else that I've been doing. Stand-up for me has been the kind of situation where because I'm not famous, and some people will ask, well, if you're so great, why aren't you famous? Well, because there's more to being famous than just being great at stand-up, which is what I'm about to talk about. The way the industry has worked and the way that the industry works now, is not a level playing field. And that's why at first I was really excited about Joe opening up his club. And when everybody says what a great club that is, it really is great. It's designed perfectly. It's the perfect comedy venue. Both rooms are absolutely perfect. And then it hit me why it's so perfect. And that's because Joe and Tony need it to be perfect in order for them to do well. They have to perform under perfect or damn near perfect conditions in order for either of them to be funny, which back in the day, Joe was funnier than he is now. He was okay at a point. But since becoming Joe Rogan, he's only gotten worse because he doesn't actually do stand-up like a regular stand-up anymore. He talks about stand-up all the time on his podcast and, oh, well, to be a stand-up, you got to do this, you got to do that. You don't really know, Joe, because you don't do any of it anymore. But we're going to get into Marc Maron's bitter ass, which Marc Maron has no one to blame but himself. For a while, he was the biggest thing. WTF, which is his podcast, was bigger than Joe Rogan's podcast at a point because WTF started first and he had Barack Obama on while Joe was just really getting established. But what happened was Marc Maron did not have the goods. And when alt comedy, which is what, like I said, they were, him and his crew or the people he hung out with and the places that really featured him. And I've seen him perform enough to know how terrible he is at actual stand-up. So it's not just me saying it because I don't like what he says here. Technically, I like some of what he says here. I just know that he doesn't have good intentions. But outside of that, what I'm trying to get at is when it comes to Marc Maron, he had a chance to really be the biggest thing in the world, but he just doesn't have the goods. He's just not a funny guy when it comes down to it. And if you don't believe me, watch his special for yourself. It's on HBO Max. I forget what it's called, but just search Marc Maron, M-A-R-C-M-A-R-O-N, and you'll find it. But it's terrible is what it is. And so we're going to watch Marc Maron talk about whatever he's talking about. But like I said, with him, it really is hating. Like he comes after Jeff Dye, but not in this video. But later on, he came after Jeff Dye. He also came after Matt Rife. Well, Jeff Dye and Matt Rife are doing something completely different from you, Marc Maron. That's the thing. Marc Maron doesn't get that while he can talk shit about everybody and make it seem like other people are beneath him, one thing I will say for Joe Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe is if you go to Mothership any night of the week, either one of them will make that audience laugh. Is it going to be quality comedy? No, not at all. I would never lie to you and say that. I would hope that they would be smart enough to not lie to you and say that. Tony probably would lie. Well, I think Tony actually has convinced himself that he's good at stand-up, but he's not. It's just what it is. That's why he didn't do well for President Trump. Like Anthony Jeselnik just brought it up not too long ago on a podcast where he said that comedy is getting away with it. And that was a quote from somebody else. I don't remember who. Maybe I'll insert a clip.
This is a quote attributed to Andy Warhol that I love. It's just art is getting away with it. You know, if you put out a special and everyone's pissed, like you didn't get away with it. You know, you need to make everyone laugh that they're like, yeah, he talked about some fucked up stuff, but we're all happy. That's art. Otherwise, you're just a troll.
And that's true. Like if Tony had done well at that Trump rally, then what would have happened was in the moment, the audience would have gone crazy and laughed at it. And then afterwards, the backlash would have been from the people that saw it on TV. But if you notice, during Tony's performance, which I also did a review of back when it happened, the audience was not laughing. They were laughing at certain parts, but when it came to especially that bit, the audience was not on board. That's not the way that should happen if you're a good stand-up. You should be able to get away with it at least in the moment. Then later, if people want to say whatever, then they can say whatever, but it's too late. You already got away with it. So I know I'm kind of hyped, but I just love stand-up, and I've been thinking about this for a couple of days, and I watched like Podcast Cringe talk about it too, like this Marc Maron situation. And I really do like those commentary channels. I think they're good. I don't get to watch them all the time, but I do think they're good. But what's missing from a lot of them is an actual perspective of being in Austin. Because in both cases, neither of these people have been to Austin. They haven't been to the Mothership. They haven't been probably even to the Comedy Store. It's like a lot of people not knowing what's going on. And Joke World, which is another comedy channel, that wants to be like the sports center of comedy is basically like a mothership propaganda channel. That's what that is. Like, that guy is in Austin and he doesn't want to say anything bad about Rogan or that crew, because then he'll lose access to the mothership and he'll lose access to some of the interviews he's getting. So feel free to watch Joke World. I used to watch it back in the day, but the thing you'll notice about Joke World, if you pay attention, is he's never critical of what's going on, no matter who's talking about it. When it comes to Joe Rogan and his crew being fake the way they are and trying to sell mothership and Austin comedy as a meritocracy, when that's not what it is. If it were a meritocracy, not only would Joe and Tony have to sit out a couple of days out of the week, or a couple of weeks out of the month, or a couple of months out of the year, quite possibly, so would a lot of their friends. Like, it's basically Joe's clubhouse is what it is. And I would be fine if he would just say that, but the fact that he's always like, this is a meritocracy, and it's like, no, it's not. That's not what it is, Joe. Either that or you don't know what meritocracy means. I don't know, CTE? What's going on? But let's get into this video and let's take apart what Marc Maron is saying, because really this video isn't meant to be about Tony or Joe, but it's just that does come into play with all this. Like I said, Maron sucks, Rogan sucks, a lot of his crew sucks. That's just what it is. You don't like it? Go find somebody else to lie to you. By the way, like, comment, and subscribe. When you hit the subscribe button, click the bell and select all notifications so that you know every time I upload.
You know, my idea of what he's done to comedy.
Sure.
And I don't think it's great.
Yeah, and I'm going to interrupt right there, because what Marc Maron has done to comedy has not been great on any level either. Like I told you guys, when Marc Maron was kind of running the world in LA, and there was a good while where alt comedy and Marc Maron were kind of seen as the feature, but audiences really did begin to think that stand-up was bad, because they were told that these people that Marc Maron was hanging out with, or the alt comics, were supposed to be like the cutting edge of comedy, the funniest ones, the smartest ones, and they really weren't. So it was like a lot of really bad shows with really great flyers. I know for a fact that a lot of them were kind of technical people and they had done graphic design or things behind the scenes at other, like some of them wrote for different things. So they had money, so they were able to pour into marketing, and they also had skills, so they were able to make really great flyers. But it'd be like really great flyers that looked almost like college brochures with like DEI people. And I just say DEI because that's really what it was. It would be like a handicapped person and a fat person and a they and a them with blue hair, and then Marc Maron headlining it. And then, you know, like maybe Maria Bamford or Tig Notaro, which Tig Notaro is very funny. Maria Bamford can be okay in like a quirky way, and she's definitely a nice person. But that's the other thing. In person, Marc Maron is not nice, even to the people that he claims to speak on behalf of in this. But just so you know, Marc Maron's actual footprint on LA comedy, or comedy in general, was not good. So when he talks about Joe and how terrible he was, ironically enough, if Marc Maron and his crew hadn't been so terrible, then there would have never been a reason for the people that he complains about now to do what they do, where Joe Rogan and Tony became edgelords, and where Matt Rife started putting a bunch of clips online, or Jeff Dye. Well, Jeff Dye was always kind of Jeff Dye, and Jeff Dye's cool. I like him. I think he's funny. He's good. He's talented. He's obviously a good-looking guy. But Marc Maron was just anti-comedy, and so was his crew. So people had to find other ways. We can talk about Matt Rife just for a second, but like Matt Rife was trying to go the traditional LA Hollywood way, and they wouldn't give him a chance because he's good looking and he doesn't look like a traditional comedian in their eyes. They thought if maybe Matt Rife were missing a leg, the industry would have given him a chance when he was on his way up. But they weren't willing to do that as far as stand-up went. As far as Wild 'N Out and some other stuff, yeah, people were being cool with him. But as far as actual stand-up was, they couldn't take him seriously as a comedian because he was too good looking, and also because he wasn't going to play that game and act like he hated the fact that he was white, which, if you know Matt Rife, a lot of his friends are people of color, more specifically black people. Matt Rife grew up in Ohio. So that should tell you everything you need to know about Matt Rife. But neither here nor there. Tony Hinchcliffe is also Ohio, and yeah, he has a few black. Let's not get into that. But my point is, because Matt Rife wasn't willing to play the game in their way and pretend that he hated himself for being white and maybe constantly kiss the asses of marginalized communities and possibly go by they them pronouns, they wouldn't give Matt Rife a chance. And so Matt Rife just went ahead and started posting his own clips, took it to the streets, you could say. The streets loved it. Matt Rife became a huge success online, and then industry understood, oh, we can make real money off of this guy. And then that's why Matt Rife became Matt Rife, and now Matt Rife is making millions and millions of dollars. So when Marc Maron talks shit about Matt Rife, he is punching way above his pay grade right there, literally and figuratively. And if he thinks Matt Rife isn't deep enough, Matt Rife is still young and will acquire more life experience that will make his stuff deeper. But for now, Matt Rife does what he does very successfully. And there's absolutely nothing for anybody to hate on about that.
I think that it's tribalized, and I think that, you know, he's created a sort of army of people that think they know comedy, but they only know a specific thing, and what they think is good is not necessarily good. It may be what they're like.
Again, I have to say that if you pay attention to Joe Rogan's crew, you may not like their brand of comedy, and you may think that it's lowbrow, and it might be in some cases, but when you see his crew, they actually are getting laughs. When it came to Marc Maron, his crew was not getting laughs. And when he says they only know a particular type of comedy, that was the same with the alt comics. They didn't know actual comedy. They didn't respect actual stand-up. They thought that everything everybody was saying in stand-up from the past, whether it's Eddie Murphy or Richard Pryor or Dave Chappelle, which is current, but still, you know what I'm saying? Like actual comics that are funny, even George Carlin, to a point, would be considered problematic to Marc Maron's crew. Or the comics, the alt comics that Marc Maron is trying to act like were like the golden age of stand-up. It was terrible. Everybody hated it. People would go to these shows and literally want to jump out a window. That's how bad stand-up was when alt comedy was the main thing. Comedy clubs were empty. They couldn't give away tickets to some of these comics. And I would mention names, but they're pretty much done in stand-up, most of them anyway. It just didn't last. It didn't hold out. And because they were catering to the lowest common denominator as far as the downtrodden, nobody was buying tickets because those people are broke. The they and thems with blue hair usually don't have any money. They work for coffee houses. They're not going to be able to afford a $30 or $40 ticket to go watch a comedian and to pay for parking and whatever other expenses they have to do to be downtown, which is where most comedy clubs are located in any city. They can't afford it. So comedy went under for a while. And that's what people can thank Joe Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe for, is they made it so people could say whatever they wanted again, which is very important in stand-up, and I would argue very important in life in general.
So it seems that Marc Maron has reignited his decades-long beef with Joe Rogan and his group of comedic assassins, as he just called them out on 2 separate podcasts in the span of a week. And Marc Maron's not just going after these guys because he doesn't like them. As he puts it, he has reasonable criticism for them.
It's reasonable criticism.
Reasonable criticism.
Yeah, it may be reasonable criticism, but what Marc Maron needs to remember is everything he's saying to them, he could redirect to himself and have it be just as true.
Like in his most recent special, Panicked, Marc actually spends a good portion of time calling out the anti-woke comedy scene that Rogan's forged in Austin, criticizing them for normalizing slurs, punching down at marginalized groups, and overall platforming dangerous ideas.
Okay, I don't know what dangerous ideas that he's platforming, but the other stuff that this guy just said, and this is why I say it comes from a lefty perspective, if you want to talk about punching down, I'm Mexican American as well as gay. So I'm what's called a double minority. I have always thought that it was a comedian's job to not punch up or punch down, but to punch in every direction. I don't know where people got this idea that comedians were supposed to only punch up, but trust me, that's not true. That's the way comedy works, is really anybody can get it. That's the way comedy really works. So when I hear punching up and punching down, I'll get into the psychology a little more on that coming up because I know he's going to mention it again. But the punching up versus punching down thing is very insulting to people like me. And it should have been insulting to the other people that would be considered marginalized, because really at that point you are getting sets, you are getting spots, you are getting special treatment because of your vulnerability, because of the fact that you're a minority. And that's why comedy sucks so bad, was because it wasn't about comedy. It was about, do we have a woman? Do we have a woman of color? Do we have a black woman? And from each of those groups, you can find a funny person, but that's what was very lazy about this thinking when it came to comedy, was they didn't bother taking the time to find or even develop the funny people of color. Instead, what they would do is, and I saw it happen a lot with black women. So if you think I'm just talking about me, I made my way on the road, and that's what made me really good at stand-up. So technically, they did do me a favor as far as being a comedian goes. As far as making money, they did me no favors. But like I said, I was still a paid regular at every club, like Laugh Factory, the Improv. I mean, so I was working plenty, and I was getting plenty of spots, but at the same time, I wasn't getting paid what a lot of people that were way less funny and not working as hard as me were getting, because that's the other thing. Like, some of us were working really hard on our acts and just being out and doing as many sets as we could possibly do in every situation that you can possibly do, and still not getting breaks. And it was because we were saying things that you shouldn't say. Like, there's plenty of funny black women, funnier than a lot of the black women that they chose from the alt scene or to represent the alt scene, or that were being chosen at that time. But they wouldn't get chances because they weren't willing to play into the fact that because I'm black, I've got to behave this particular way, and I got to be raised on welfare, and I got to talk about food stamps, and I got to talk about a bunch of stuff that upscale black women that in a lot of cases can be very funny. We're just like, yeah, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to play a caricature of a black woman because the alt scene wants to see me as a victim in order to let me get ahead. And I dare any comic that was on the LA scene from anywhere from 2010 to 2017 and even after to tell me that I'm lying. And really, 2010, it was starting to set in, but 2013 is where it really got ugly. And then by the time we got to 2017, which is when I left, that's when it really was just nothing but DEI hires in comedy. And again, I hate to use that term, but it really was like affirmative action for comedy, but not good in any way. It was like, just give me any black woman that will say the things we want her to say and play this role of being down from everybody else so that it appears she's always punching up. There's no way that this black woman could ever have enough power or agency or come from a good enough family that she could possibly be equal to the rest of us. We need a hood rat that possibly went to college on a scholarship.
Pterodactyl arms? You supposed to put that on the grill. He ain't even supposed to live.
And if you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend you go watch that entire special.
And that was David Lucas, who's the roast comic. And that was him talking about one of the comics earlier from Kill Tony, which that's the format of the show. So for American Redact to bring that up as like dangerous or really punching down, that's what the show's about. And American Redact is constantly putting Tony on. So at the same time as he pretends that maybe he thinks it's abhorrent, he's also promoting it. So it really makes no sense when these people really go after Kill Tony like that, because it's like you either don't know the show or it's just that Marc Maron is really lining up with your politics right now. So you want to stand for him no matter what he says, which I'm fine with that, but just say that instead of acting like this is just the facts of comedy. Technically, not to be rude, American Redact, but you don't know the facts of comedy. I can tell by listening to you that you really don't know much about comedy at all.
But to give you an idea of what he talks about in that special, here's him poking fun at the idea of Theo Von having Adolf Hitler on his podcast, and what exactly that would sound like.
I think if Hitler were alive today, he'd probably appear on Theo Von's podcast. And Theo would be like, see, y'all did a lot of meth, right? I mean, all the Nazis were all fucked up on meth, right, Hitler? That shit'll make you crazy, dog. I did some meth once. I was up for 3 days, and then I ate a live bird. No shit, Hitler, a live bird, bro. Hey,
Hey, Hitler, you probably didn't even hate the Jews. That was just the meth making you crazy, dog.
Yeah, and they always play that clip, but that's because that's the only good thing about Marc Maron's special. And the other thing that you guys need to know is Marc Maron has been on this trip against certain kinds of comics forever. And really, I heard an interview where he was talking to Patrice O'Neal and Jim Norton. And at that time, he was complaining about Dane Cook because Dane Cook was the one standing in his way at that time, which if it's always somebody else standing in your way, it's probably not anybody standing in your way. It's probably you. So that's something Marc Maron needs to keep in mind. But he says in that interview that he didn't work hard enough, that he's never been a hard worker.
I find that most guys who get real famous and hold on to a career, they work their asses off. And I, as a guy who doesn't, necessarily work his ass off, after I talk to a lot of these cats who have money and who have fame, the one thing they do is they work hard.
Hard workers.
And so, if there's anything I can respect, it's that, because I certainly don't have that.
So he's lucky to have the success that he's had. And he's lucky that people have been buying it for this long. Because really, Marc Maron is an industry comedian, and that's all he is. He's not a fan favorite. He's not a comics comic. People aren't anxious to see Marc Maron perform on the road. Marc Maron literally is an industry comic. So maybe instead be thankful that you've had the blessings that you've had, Marc Maron. I swear, people go really far on very little talent, and then they still have the nerve to act like they've been shortchanged in some way.
So now he's on a podcast press tour for that new special, and he's sent shots left and right at the entire Rogansphere.
Like I said, he'll talk about everything but his special because it's not a good special. And if he were really a great comic, what he would do instead of talking about everybody else is point to which jokes he has that basically counter what it is they're saying. Like, I have a bit that says this particular thing, or where I address this particular thing. If you were a great comic, you could have put all that in your special, even if it was subs and didn't mention their name, and it would have been a lot better than what he's doing now. And the thing with Theo, even, it is a really good and funny impression, but at the same time, when it turns out that it's because you're hating, then it makes it not as fun or funny because it really is just you trying to shit on Theo Von, which I remember when Theo Von was terrible. When Theo Von first came on the scene, he was just coming off reality TV and being that guy, and people were really mean to him. They would bully him. I never had a negative opinion from Theo because I'm from the generation that remembers Road Rules when he was on Road Rules. And I always thought Theo was a likable character. So I never had a problem with Theo Von, and I was always cool. But Theo Von took himself from being not funny, not good at stand-up at all, to now he does his thing. I'm not being shady, but he's just not a great stand-up. I mean, like, he's good and his audience loves him. Don't get me wrong. Some of these people, it's like their audience really loves them and they are good for what they do and they find their path. Like Theo is really great with his podcast and people love him for his podcast. And however you get it, you get it. That's why I say I don't hate on people and I understand the dynamics of it. But something that somebody like Marc Maron doesn't get is that there is always going to be somebody that's hungrier, better looking, comes from a better family, more talented, a harder worker, whatever it is, there's always going to be somebody that's more of whatever it is you are. And so you just have to kind of get in where you fit in, find your spot, and then really just work that the same way Theo has. There's funnier people than Theo. There's people that are more talented interviewers than Theo. But Theo is Theo, and Theo is absolutely killing it, making a bunch of money, and that's inarguable, and has a lot of influence when it comes to politics and some of the things people think about on the world stage. Why is that? Maybe because Theo worried about Theo instead of being worried about everybody else, which is the opposite of what Mark's doing, which some of you might feel the same way about me, but in case you can't tell, I'm making content right now. So that's why I'm talking about this and thinking about it. And it's something that I'm actually really good at and that I can talk about with some authority. And I am kind of tired of watching other people talk about it from an outsider perspective. That's cool too. I don't hate on them. But at the same time, sometimes I feel like, yeah, this is where they could use some actual insight and not just a person guessing at everything.
Like in this recent Bad Friends episode, he goes at Rogan in a pretty hilarious and major way, roasting him for leading an army of enlightened meatheads and predicting that they'll run out of material pretty quickly, since the majority of jokes that they tell are pretty surface level jabs at marginalized groups that they've completely beaten rooted into the ground.
Now that I would agree with when it comes to being surface level jokes, but that'll also happen when you live like Tony and Joe, because Tony and Joe kind of live in a comedy bubble. So they're not really out in the streets like that. They don't know trans people. They don't really hang out with a lot of actual gay people. Yeah, every once in a while there's a gay comic at the club like me or Dillon Carlino, who's killing it on Instagram right now, is I think a regular, or he's at least around the mothership, like as in development or something like that. Not sure. Adam has no taste in comedy. Adam Eget, the booker, he would sleep on everybody if people didn't put people under his nose. That's what kind of booker Adam is. Adam is so caught up with hanging out with comedians like Shane Gillis or anybody that he can really starfuck that he doesn't pay attention to what his actual job is. And if he were to, he still wouldn't be good at it anyway because he just doesn't actually know stand-up. Again, that's just 100% true. That's something that Joe Rogan's not willing to accept because Adam will kiss his ass the way Joe likes it. And so Joe will never do anything about that. But the truth is there are gay comics on the Austin scene that would be really good for Mothership, but they're not really around like that. And they're not part of Joe's inner circle. So Joe doesn't really have exposure to gay or trans or any of that. Neither does Tony. And so they say all these surface level jokes that really have no depth at all. And that's part of why they actually suck at stand-up, because they don't have a lot of life experience, even though they're old enough that they could or should. But, you know, they're both too busy being celebrities rather than being comedians. And that's 100% true.
Like, if you know anything about this Rogan era of comedy, you'd know that they do this quite frequently. Like, to this day, they're probably still making COVID-19 jokes.
You know good and goddamn well they're still doing COVID-19 jokes. They cannot... They really will beat something into the ground, because when you don't have much, you do with what you got.
And Marc Maron considers this shtick to be hack.
But yeah, me and who else?
Rogan.
Okay.
Who's that?
Joe Rogan.
Joe, he's
Joseph Rogan?
yeah, he's out of Texas.
Oh, Texas. Got it.
Yeah.
I got it. Got it.
Yeah. You love Austin, don't you?
He's running half the planet out of Texas.
Yeah.
He's got a tight hold on the enlightened meatheads.
Dude, Maron's disdain.
It's not disdain. It's reasonable criticism.
Reasonable criticism.
Yeah.
You know, and he keeps mentioning the enlightened meatheads or the in shape fellas, I think is the way he refers to them later. And that is annoying because he was just the king of a bunch of soft body betas. That's what he was. And they were all trying to be like kind of big men on camp. It was funny to watch these nerds. And I say that in the most just honest way possible because they were geeks. The alt scene comics were actual geeks. And they would try to big dog on people. And it would just be like, you could never be a bully or anything like that. It's just that right now the industry is kissing your ass because you will say you hate yourself for being a white guy. You will say the things that you're supposed to say, but they're horrible, soft-bodied betas. So I don't really know how Marc Maron thinks he's in a position of superiority by calling out that Rogan's crew is in shape, which, to tell you the truth, not all of them are in shape. Sometime look at Tony when he walks out on that stage.
When was the last time you spoke with him?
I don't know. That's a good question. I guess it would have been at the store. I never talked to him in Austin. I don't go into the club. I don't really think I'm on his radar. So
something tells me you are.
Oh yeah,
something tells me you are.
I don't. You know, it's weird that you get lumped into a certain thing, and maybe it's my assumption that you know his army of you know, healthy fellas.
See what I mean? It's like, what does that matter? Why do you care so much about the bodies of the guys that maybe that's your problem, is you're so worried about the bodies instead of actually writing better material or working on being funny, Marc Maron. Like, why don't you just work on being funny and let them have whatever bodies they have?
Is that their title? Army of Healthy Fellas is so good.
No, you just got to, you know, got to stay in, keep the machine.
The machine's got to be good.
Yeah.
That's a shot at Bert. Go ahead.
What do you think the Austin shelf life is going to be?
And Bobby is just hating himself right now. He couldn't wait to hear Mark talk about this. You can tell that Santino is a little bit uncomfortable because he gets along with Rogan really well. But Bobby Lee, on the other hand, he has a problem with the fact that he feels like Austin took a lot of the good LA comics, which that only gives Bobby a chance to do even better because Bobby's so terrible himself. And he's not terrible as in people don't laugh at him. People laugh at Bobby, but when I say he's been doing the same thing for 20 years, he really has. I remember when I first saw him at the store and I was amazed by him. And then 20 years later, I was like, hey, that's the same set that I heard 20 years ago. And then Bobby will try to act kind of snotty on top of it, which is just sort of extra annoying because if anybody threatens Bobby or if anybody kind of bucks up to Bobby, and one day I'll tell you guys a story about a situation me and Bobby had in the green room, nothing too big, but just where I kind of had to let him know, like, if you want to do this, we can do it. And I was talking about straight up words, like, I'll go at Bobby all the way, just straight up words. I don't have to get physical in any way, and I'm not threatening that. But what I am saying is Bobby isn't what he pretends to be when he acts like he's a smartass. And if he had pulled that shit that he pulled with George from Logan Paul's podcast with anybody else, there's a good chance they would have handed his ass to him, and then Bobby would have played the victim, which is what Bobby does, if you guys haven't noticed, is he will be the aggressor, and then as soon as somebody attacks him, even if it's just verbally, suddenly Bobby falls back and acts like he's the victim. That's what Bobby is. And I know some people really love Bobby, and they're going to come after me. Stop me when I lie.
Well, I don't know. Like, I think that it's so effectively tribalized at this point. It really comes down to material. I mean, at what point, it's like whatever they represented in terms of policy. And it's not a stretch. It's like they won. Trans people are frightened. They have no ability to get health care anymore. And
this is how I know that Marc Maron doesn't know any trans people, because I personally have had trans friends for the last 30 years. I know 0 trans people that are frightened. A lot of the trans women in training that Mark would know, because I remember the trans women that were on the comedy scene, the alt scene. There was Riley Jess Silverman and there was Olivia Hayter, and both of them were absolutely horrible at stand-up. And almost every trans comic that I've ever seen has been absolutely horrible, because a trans comic that's going to be funny is going to be more like Flame Monroe, which, if you're not familiar, Flame Monroe should be a huge deal in even the alt scene. But Flame Monroe will never get put on with people like this, because Flame Monroe says a lot of things that would be contradictory to what they're saying. Flame Monroe is a lot like the girls I knew coming up. And let me tell you, none of the trans women that I know, and I have talked to them recently, and none of them are afraid about anything. Are they happy about it? Do they like that I voted the way that I voted? Not necessarily, but it's not like they feel like I ruined their lives, and it's not like they feel like their lives are in danger right now. So when you have people like the trans women that Marc Maron would not even really know, of course they're going to be panicked. They look like men, and people are talking about not allowing men into the bathroom. So I guess you have reason to be afraid, but maybe work on your look.
And they're afraid of being alive and have no freedom left. So that's done.
What freedom don't they have? And also, when you talk about not having access to healthcare, the only people that don't have access to gender affirming care are minors. Like right now, any adult can still do anything to themselves that they could do before. And if we're talking about Austin specifically, not only can you get cross-sex hormones as an adult trans person in Austin, Texas, you can get them for free from a clinic. So what does that tell you if it's free? That it's more than likely state funded. So the government, Texas government, Austin local, whichever it is, probably a combination of both for the funding, but is actually allowing adult trans people to access their gender affirming care. So is it really the situation he's describing, or is it just him saying that it's this so that it sounds like he has more of a reason to be a hater than he actually has?
When do you stop with the jokes?
When do you stop with the jokes?
And like immigrants, okay, well, they're being ripped away from their homes, and and they're all terrified, and okay, so that's done. When do you stop with the jokes?
Right.
I mean, it's one thing to pick on the vulnerable and the marginalized, but I mean, they're down.
Okay, just being 100% honest, I've heard Tony and Joe enough to know that they don't do derogatory jokes about immigrants. It's just not something they do. And Joe Rogan has recently said that he doesn't like that part of what Trump is doing. And I know some people will be like, but Joe Rogan still had him on and Joe Rogan endorsed him. Yeah, and Joe Rogan can also use that same platform to say, I don't agree with what he's doing here. And you could argue that it is helpful. I'll give credit where credit's due. I personally think we need to get rid of the illegal immigrants, but Joe Rogan has spoken out against that. And that's at least somewhat brave because it could turn his own audience on him, but he still does it anyway. So Marc Maron bringing that up as something that they do, I don't really notice Tony or Joe just keeping it 100% real, doing jokes that are negative about immigrants. I mean, like maybe occasionally like a throwaway, but where it's like really going at them, no. Maybe occasionally on Kill Tony, but Kill Tony, that's what it is. I pretty much forgive everything on Kill Tony, and not that I'm anybody to forgive anything, but if we're going to talk about people of color or an LGBT, Tony really does that part well. That I will give credit where it's due. Tony is a punch in every direction type of comedian. So I'm sorry, Mark, if you have this idea that people are only supposed to punch up, but Tony, when it comes to Kill Tony, really does punch in every direction, which is what you're supposed to do. Which, never misunderstand what I'm saying. Kill Tony, it's a great show, it's funny, and Tony Hinchcliffe is the perfect host for his show, 100%. So I'm never trying to bag on that. And that would be hating for me to be like, Kill Tony isn't good, it's not funny. It can be really good. Sometimes it sucks. Not that I watch a lot, but I watch enough to know that sometimes it absolutely sucks. Donkey balls. Marc Maron just doesn't know comedy. That's what it is.
I mean, like,
they're down.
why do you got to keep hitting them unless
Yeah.
you're a hack? Now there's a question.
Wow.
I would actually say Marc Maron is a hack from the alt comic lefty direction. If you ever pay attention to what that is, that's a lot of what Mark's special, or the parts that I saw of it, was him just doing what all leftists do when they're on stage. And again, leftists can be very funny. I've seen it happen, but Marc Maron just isn't one of the ones doing it.
Mark,
He
wow.
comes in swinging.
Yeah.
Another issue that Mark has with Joe Rogan was one that Mark's had a problem with since the early 90s, which is that comedy is supposed to be for the quote-unquote sensitive weirdos, not necessarily for the high school locker room bullies that Joe Rogan's ushered in.
That's not true at all. Anybody can be funny, and some of the biggest comics have actually been cool. Like Richard Pryor was actually a cool guy. Eddie Murphy was a cool guy. I mean, Sam Kinison may have been not a traditionally good-looking guy, but he was practically a rock star, and a lot of women loved Sam Kinison. Doug Stanhope, he's older now, but when he was younger, he was a good-looking enough guy. I mean, maybe they weren't gym rats. And I just don't get the focus on the superficial is what I'm getting at. Why is he so obsessed with that?
And even though I don't fully agree with this stance, since to me, if you're funny, you're funny, it is a stance that I've seen other comics take. Like when Tim Dillon was calling out Brendan Schaub right after he released his insult of a comedy special, Gringo Poppy.
Well, that's right there how you know that Joe Rogan doesn't really love stand-up or understand it the way that he says he does. Because if Joe Rogan really loves stand-up, he wouldn't have put Brendan Schaub in the position that he put him in. Because there are still, no matter how cool you are, only 52 weeks in a year. So if you decide to bump somebody like Brendan Schaub in, then you're automatically taking a weekend from a comic that has earned their way in. And instead of being a true meritocracy and Joe acting like the senior comic that he would have been at that point and being like, Brendan, you're going to need to work your way up. And then maybe Joe pays him more than he should pay him to go on the road with him. And I don't mean that in an insulting way, but with Brendan being a new comic when he first started dealing with Joe, or Joe first put him on, Joe could have just paid him more than he should have got with that amount of experience, brought him on the road with him, shown him the ropes, and been like, look, if you really want to do this, you're going to need to go to every open mic you can go to. You're going to have to really work overtime in order to catch up and actually be worth where you're going to be and the people that are coming out to you. But since Joe didn't do that, Brendan had like a spoiled kid mentality where he thought he was better than he was. And so he was throwing his weight around everywhere, and it made people not like him. And he also thought he was funnier than he was, which if Joe really knew stand-up the way that he pretends to, he would have known that Brendan isn't and hasn't ever been stand-up comedian funny. Brendan is UFC fighter funny, but not stand-up comedian funny. But had Joe maybe worked with him a little bit more or been a little tougher on him and been like, apply the same kind of training that you did to UFC to stand-up, then maybe Brendan could have been better at stand-up and had more longevity. But now, after 12 years, I think it is, Brendan has basically kind of retired from stand-up, and Joe won't even have him at the mothership. And it's because Brendan just wasn't good at stand-up and didn't bother to even get decent at stand-up. So, like I said, if Joe was a real friend and he really cared about stand-up even, he wouldn't have screwed all the other comics that he did screw by putting Brendan in that position, because there's no other way Brendan would have cut the line the way he did. I remember when Brendan first showed up on the LA comedy scene, and he was on everything and everywhere that he shouldn't have been and should have been forced to earn his way into. But instead it was just given to him because he was Joe's boy and Joe felt bad for him. And that's again where Adam, who was in charge at the Comedy Store at that time, if he really cared about stand-up himself or he really cared about his name, he never would have let Brendan be on any of those shows at the Comedy Store, because he would have been like, this place has a reputation. This is the world famous Comedy Store. We're not going to have some amateur comic that's basically an open micer or didn't even bother to be an open micer, so skip that step completely just because he's a UFC fighter and one of your friends that you feel bad for. We're not going to be giving him pity spots.
When I watch Brendan do that, it's like I go, here's a big tough guy who I should just see in a Ferrari, and he should be able to rip people's faces off with his catcher mid hands. And I see him running around the stage going, oh! I go, you're gay now. You've become gay.
Why
are you gay?
He was a fucking knight. He was a knight. He was a knight.
He's a knight.
And now he's a jester.
Now he's gay.
He's a gay jester.
He's a gay man. He's a fully gay man. When you watch the special, he's like, woo!
Well, the truth is, Brendan had no options. He wasn't going to be able to be in UFC anymore. He just wasn't that caliber of fighter, or he had gotten old enough that he just wasn't good. I remember when Joe had that talk with him on his show. I've seen the clips of it where he wasn't being realistic with himself, and Joe did do him a favor. But when Tim comes after him for that, I get it, because Tim's a comedian and Tim's going to come after whatever he's going to come after. And I'm actually friends with Tim and I like him a lot and I like his takes a lot. I know some people are mad at him right now because of some of the things that he's said or hasn't said regarding the administration lately, but that's not my relationship with Tim. And I am very much not only entertained by Tim, but consider him a really good friend. But when it comes to Tim giving him a hard time about doing what he just had to do, Brendan didn't have a lot of options. So Tim's just making the best and having fun, but Brendan, what else was he going to do? Joe really did hook him up, but he just didn't deserve that hookup.
So Mark's main issue with this is that the weirdo alt comics have sort of been pushed to the side in recent times.
They needed to be. They were terrible when they were in charge. For real. That part, Joe and Tony did a favor to stand-up comedy, and I would say that even to their faces. I really do feel like that part was them doing stand-up comedy a favor. They've overstayed their welcome now, and it's time for them to move on and do something else with themselves, but they won't figure that out until it's too late anyway. But I think kind of audience and audience taste is starting to push them out too. And so Mothership might continue to be what it is, and Austin might end up being like the Branson, Missouri of stand-up comedy, but it's definitely not going to turn into the epicenter of stand-up comedy. And again, I'll remind you guys, I really do know the Austin scene, and we can talk a little bit more about that coming up, I think.
And when Mark brings this point up to Bobby Lee, he actually gets him to join in on trashing Austin comics, which was just great to see.
That's a problem.
Yeah.
So, and the bigger problem about what you're saying is I think we all still do exist, but the nature of the comedy business is fragmented and some of it's tribalized. But there used to be a lot more weirdos around who were kind of exciting and interesting and took it a different place.
They didn't actually put the weirdos on with the alt comedy scene. And I know people think I'll be partial to him because he's my friend, But really, if the LA comedy scene, when it was alt, really did respect Weirdos, then Kenny Lyon would definitely have gotten a lot more spots and would have been treated with a lot more respect, because Kenny Lyon is extremely damaged. If you guys aren't familiar with Kenny, I do consider him like a little brother, but I don't say this because Kenny Lyon is my friend. Technically, Kenny Lyon is my friend and we're close like we are because Kenny is that kind of talent. And had they maybe guided Kenny a little more, but that's also a part of what happens in stand-up comedy now, is nobody actually guides anybody. Nobody really helps anybody out because everybody's just looking for a leg up or somebody to kind of prop them up a little bit more. Like if anybody thinks that like Andrew Schulz or Shane Gillis or Mark Norman, any of those comics that Joe Rogan has on, that he's doing them a favor, they legitimize him. So yeah, maybe he gives them a little bit of audience, which most of them not really. They already were doing their own thing and they were doing well enough and just going to continue to grow. So maybe he bumped that growth a little bit faster, but I don't even think that. I really feel like Joe just has a way of white labeling comics where they're already an established brand. They're already going somewhere. And then right before they maybe hit the big market, he puts his stamp on them and acts like, oh, that's a Rogan comedian. That's a comedian that was pumped up by the Rogansphere. But really what it is they legitimize him. They make it seem like Joe is more of a comedian than he actually is, because they're actually good at stand-up. And so him being able to hang out with them, have conversations with them, have them on his podcast, break them for the general public, it would seem, to the untrained eye, untrained being the key word in that. But they basically co-sign at that point that Joe is great. And because Joe makes so much money and he does have a platform and he can be cool to talk to or whatever, I never had an interest in talking to him. When he would go to his green room, I would leave the green room, and I had been told before that I could hang out. And one time I saw him actually kick somebody out, like have Adam kick somebody out. I won't say the name, but he didn't have them kick me out. And so I knew I could be in there when he was in there, but I never felt comfortable being around him because I didn't feel like we had a lot in common. And I didn't want him to feel like I was like trying to like angle to get to know him. Like I'd be cool with him like any other person, but I just didn't want to be that guy. And also, I didn't ever want to be put in a position where I had to really pretend that him and Tony were actually funny, because I know I'm not a good actor and I know that I wouldn't actually be able to sell that. And so I didn't leave myself in positions where I would have to be like in close quarters with him. But my point is, these people are able to humor him to a certain degree, and he can be cool enough to like hang out with, especially if you're like a straight guy and you don't mind talking about things that nobody cares about. And so if anything, it's mutual. But to me, when it comes to actual stand-up, it really is them doing him the favor by making him look legit as a stand-up, which I bring it back to his Netflix special. He's really not a stand-up. If you saw that Netflix special, you know that that's just not what he is.
I would argue with just talky talk comedy, there's not that many people bringing it to a different place, dude.
Right. Well, there is some good ones that, like, I think that kid Casey Rocket's really entertaining and fun and different and unique. I think they're there, right?
Yeah.
I think the problem is there's so much sludge, there's so much shit, there's way more noise than we've ever fucking seen.
Yeah.
So it's hard to appreciate or even care, because all that's really being shown is kind of the constant, like, give it to him, give it to him, give it to him, give it to him. So I get.
Well, that's where the internet has become kind of what it is, because like I said, with Marc Maron and his crew being the way that they are, people just had to go to the internet and give it to him, give it to him, give it to him. And Andrew Santino, like I said, he's fun and he's cool and he was always nice to me. And I'm not talking shit when I say this, but he really did get the treatment that he got at the Comedy Store because he's a cool guy. And there's a minute coming up where they're talking about bro-y comedy and that kind of stuff. And really, Santino epitomizes that. So when he's saying that, it's kind of like he's trying to, in my opinion, make it seem like he's not that, and people just have this perception. But Andrew Santino is definitely a beneficiary of that bro-y type atmosphere that was created for a minute there at the Comedy Store. And Adam really wanted that because Adam is half a girl like when you deal with him, Adam is not like a man's man. So if you have him around like bro-y type guys, then he gets to feel like one of the guys. I wouldn't be surprised if Adam was raised with a lot of sisters or just always around girls in not ladies man sort of way, and just like almost like they don't respect him like a eunuch kind of way. And I'm not saying this because of my personal feelings towards Adam when it comes to liking him or disliking him, but this is just the read I get off of Adam, is that he's not really a guy's guy. And so that's why he's always trying to like put himself in these positions where he's kind of up Shane Gillis's ass or like Santino's ass or some of the different guys that I see him around, Joe Rogan. Anyway, let me know in the comments if whatever you think, you're going to let me know anyway.
I'm tired of the attitude.
I thought you were going to say violence in this country.
No. I'm tired. They come up back to LA. One guy, I want to name his name, and go, oh, you seem like you're thriving. And he goes, I'm killing it.
Killing it.
You know what I mean? And I'm like, whoa, dude. You moved out because you couldn't survive here.
Yeah.
That's definitely Tony Hinchcliffe he's talking about. But like I said, Bobby Lee needs to work more on his writing and worry less about who's killing it or what they're saying. Bobby Lee has been asked to go to Austin. They've tried to convince him to go to Austin. Everybody loves Bobby, and I don't know exactly why. It's not that I don't love Bobby. I used to like him a lot, and we used to see him, pretty regularly at Cafe 101. And there we were cool and stuff like that. But then he turned weird somewhere in between, and I think it really is because of his insecurity. But whatever the case with Bobby Lee isn't what he pretends to be, and he should worry more about his own attitude instead of worrying about Tony Hinchcliffe's or anybody else. Like, Bobby has his own problems. Also, he's a disgusting person, and he talks about it regularly. So, learn to wipe your ass, Bobby.
This is a different...
It's an animal.
It's an animal.
Well, I think the weirdos you're referring to, by the way, were birthed, and I defend this till I'm blue in the face, were birthed at the Comedy Store.
Yeah.
And I think I always push, I was like, people don't know that about the store. They think they hear this like corporate bro. And that happens internally in LA a lot too, where they're like, the store is a fucking, whatever, sellout factory of bro comics. Because
Not anymore.
No, but there was a wash of it that came through, and I think...
Yeah, Joe, they moved to Austin.
See, not to be mean, but Santino was a part of that wash of it. He just was. It's like, and Mark was kind of coming for him right there, but, is a hater. But that's just what it is. I swear, these people aren't self-aware at all.
But
And real quick here, just based on the voice inflection that Bobby was doing there, I'm almost certain that he was talking about Tony Hinchcliffe. One thing that this podcast was missing, though, was the larger, more political reasons that Marc Maron called out right-wing podcasters in his special for. But luckily for us, he actually explained it in detail in the Vulture podcast he did nearly 10 days ago, calling out Joe Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe by name, which even if you don't agree with anything Maron says, you have to respect the fact that he calls them out by name here, as most comics are too afraid to seriously go after Joe Rogan in this sort of fashion.
No, plenty of comics go after Joe Rogan in that sort of fashion. It's just they only cover it when it's like a particular person. And I don't blame them because it will get them certain clips. Like, I know that every one of these comedy commentary channels knew when I came out and talked about the mothership, and a lot of the comedy world was talking about when I was honest about the mothership. And initially, I got a lot of support. But what happens is once people see consequences start to happen, and then my friends started getting banned from Mothership because Tony and Joe Rogan didn't do what they did to end cancel culture. They did it to become cancel culture. So when they saw consequences that I suffered, consequences that some of my friends suffered, not being allowed at Mothership anymore, even though they're good comics, Leonardo Joni, and they saw the way that went down, then they fall back. Then channels like these don't cover it. And so people learn not to say anything. It's only people like Marc Maron that will get like the press and don't mind saying it because there's no consequence to Marc Maron. So in that way, he is doing something good. I just think, again, he's doing it for the wrong reasons. But Anthony Jeselnik, he's calling it out in a good way, if you ask me. And he has no reason and is not being a hater. Maybe one day I'll cover that. But Anthony Jeselnik really has called everything out for what it is when it comes to Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe.
But anyways, in this podcast, Marc Maron explains that he's going after these guys because they essentially sided with Trump solely because he was more pro-speech than the other option.
A lot of people think that is just a comedy thing, but honestly, as a person that's from two marginalized communities, a double minority, and has seen the way a lot of these things play out, there were a lot of things a lot of people needed to hear. So if you voted for Trump based on speech alone and having less censorship from the left, I still think that's a legitimate reason to have voted for him. And I still think you did the right thing, because if one side isn't allowed to ever say what they think, because that's what was happening on the right, and I just say that as a person that not only was on the right, but again, double minority, I'm supposed to be able to speak, I'm supposed to be heard, especially by the left, but the amount of censorship I dealt with from the left and other people of color dealt with from the left, and also just white people dealt with from the left, it just wasn't good that way. So if you truly believe in democracy, it still was the right thing to do. So I don't know why Marc Maron would have a problem with that, other than the fact that for Marc Maron, it's better if people aren't allowed to say certain things, because then he doesn't have to hear things that he doesn't like and have to understand the way that the world really works. Just like Joe Rogan doesn't read his comments because Joe Rogan knows that the truth is hiding in those comments. He's right. There's a lot of people that just talk shit and are trolls on the internet. But there's also a lot of truth in your comments, Joe Rogan. It would probably do you some good to at least peruse them every once in a while. You're a strong enough person to be able to take that, right?
But now that he's in office and has acted on these policies, it's almost as if they're acting shocked that he's doing anything like that. I mean, just the other day, Andrew Schulz posted this screenshot to his story reacting to the Trump administration not mandating IVF care. I mean, this sort of thing is happening every day in the Rogan-verse at this point.
I think people on the left should actually be thankful to Andrew Schulz. Andrew Schulz is another one that was just about to pop when Rogan decided to put him on. He didn't need Rogan, and I know he's loyal to Rogan and he's good friends with Rogan now, but I always thought Andrew Schulz is funny, and when people try to make it seem like, yeah, you may think he has shit opinions, I personally don't, but you may think he has shit opinions, but that doesn't mean he's not funny. And that's what a lot of people don't get, is a person can have opinions you don't agree with and have that be off stage and then still be good at what they do. So to make it seem like Andrew Schulz isn't funny, which is what a lot of these commentary channels do, that's just not true. Every once in a while, do people turn on him because of certain things he says or the way he says certain things? Yeah, but that's always going to be a part of being a public figure, even at my level. And Schulz has so much more attention on him that, of course, he's really going to get it sometimes. But I think it's very big of him to actually say when he doesn't agree with something. And that's the way politics should work. And that's why I think that the left gets so mad, is because the left really does believe that they have to support their person no matter what. So no matter how crazy Kamala came off, or the fact that she seemed like she was drunk all the time, or the fact that we all knew the entire time that Joe Biden was having some kind of cognitive problems, the left is cool to act like, oh, I don't notice any of that. What do you mean? What you're saying isn't computing. It's not even true what you're saying. Where people that were supportive of Trump, even if they're not now, I can respect it because they're at least saying, these are the things that I don't like, or this is what I noticed, which is way better than what the left is doing when it comes to that. And I know that my politics do come into play in that, but at the same time, I really do think it's kind of unbiased if you really pay attention to it, because how is it nobody on the left could tell anything was going on with Joe Biden? And even his people pretended that they didn't notice anything about Joe Biden. But then last minute, all of a sudden, he just wasn't prepared. That just came on like that out of nowhere. And then Jake Tapper wrote an entire book about how he saw it happening and was part of the cover up. But nobody ever mentions that or says on the left. And that might be a lot of why a lot of people don't support the left, is because you really have to buy into a lot of bullshit to support the left, or pretend not to see a lot of things. And they'll turn on you like crazy if you do. So Marc Maron doesn't really have a point in what he's saying when it comes to this.
And Mark touches on that in this Vulture podcast.
And, Rogan and Hinchcliffe and, just a lot of these people just locked into this anti-woke thing. But now, the government, which is for all practical, good intents and purposes, is an authoritarian government, and we have a fairly dominant fascistic culture.
I think if it was truly fascist, Marc Maron wouldn't have a voice and wouldn't be able to say the things he's saying now without consequence. I think the left would be completely shut down if it were as fascist as they claim that it is, or if it were even fascist at all. It's not fascism that's happening. You may not like it and may say it's authoritarian, but I don't even know how you would say it's authoritarian when, if you pay attention to a lot of what's going on right now, a lot of the people that are living in the affected areas, they're actually living better lives because there's some changes implemented. Like if you're paying attention to what's going on in Washington, D.C., some people that are actually living in Washington, D.C., Black people of color, are talking about the fact that they actually needed something to happen because the carjackings and the violence that's going on, the robbery, the theft, that really is a problem, and the unaliving as well.
Yeah. So they're using the same language, which is anti-woke, to dismantle all progressive institutions.
They need to be dismantled. We won't get into my personal, but it was really bad for comedy. The progressive institutions, the woke thinking, it's just not a way to create. You should be able to access everything. And especially if you're talking about what you grew up around or your own community. And I'm not meaning this just towards people of color. There are white people that grew up with plenty of exposure to Black people, to Latinos, to different races, ethnicities, religions, and they weren't allowed to do any of that or would get shut down for doing it. And so if we're talking about the world in general or politics in general, again, people should be able to say these things, because if those are your observations and you're supposed to be an American citizen and you're supposed to have freedom of speech, why should you get in trouble or why should you be shunned for saying things that, even if they turn out to be wrong, are what you've noticed, or even if they turn out to be not wrong, because you can't be wrong in what you notice, but even if they turn out not to be statistically the norm or the overriding, if you're noticing it in your area, there's a good chance other people are noticing it in your area, and maybe it does need to be worked on, or maybe it does need to be looked at, or maybe it is an actual problem, or maybe it's just a funny observation or something to bring up in conversation to bond with other people. But there were so many restrictions in like thinking and speech when it came to these progressive institutions that it really didn't do anybody any favors.
And, you know, whether you like it or not, or whether that's not what you signed up for, you know, you tied yourself to that horse.
Yeah, people from the left are very unforgiving that way, and they want your decision to be your final decision. And that's a part of why a lot of people are leaving the left, is because it's so unforgiving, where if you really were thinking about it in terms of getting votes, you would be happy to have people have an awakening and come over to your side, and you would be welcoming of them, because while they may have thought a particular way and led to a particular consequence in the past, that doesn't mean they can't be a part of the solution moving forward. And that's what the right is at least more willing to do, is when people realize that maybe the left wasn't for them and they come over to the right, they are really welcomed with open arms, unless they're being traitorous or trying to turn the right into the left. Once you start trying to do that, people will get like, no, you don't belong over here on this side. But if you're coming to the right with pure intentions, or as pure as your intentions can be, and even if you have diversity in thought, the right is more willing to be welcoming of you, where the left wants to be like, no, you stay over there. And it's like, how do you ever expect to win another election if you won't allow people to come over to you? Do you think that they're going to kiss your ass and grovel? Because most people aren't. They're like, oh, well, just go back to being on the right. I don't have to be over here.
Mm-hmm. Right?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's not even a matter of unforgivable. It just is what it is. So you can backpedal all you want, but this is the reality, is that, you know, democracy was squashed because of...
Democracy was actually squashed back in 2016 by the Democrats, and it was against their own party. Because in 2016, liberals actually wanted to run Bernie Sanders, but instead the DNC actually undermined Bernie Sanders because they wanted Hillary. And so some could say that there was a good chance that Bernie would have actually won if he had gone against Trump, which who knows how that would have played out, but he at least would have had a better shot than Hillary did, but the DNC was really trying to force Hillary on everybody. And even afterwards, when Donna Brazile wrote her book and talked about the fact that they had railroaded Bernie, and even though Bernie knew that and talked about it himself, it still didn't stop people on the left from continuing to stick with the left. But that was the first swipe that the left took at democracy. And then they knew ahead of time that Joe Biden, or at least the people in his camp, the people closest to him, the people that would be in charge of telling him to step down, all knew that Joe Biden was experiencing cognitive decline. But instead of being honest about that and just either forcing him to step down or talking him into stepping down, instead what they did is waited till the last minute, and then they just went ahead and put Kamala in there instead of going the traditional route and actually doing a primary and figuring out who the voters actually would have wanted. And then they just tried to throw a bunch of money and celebrity endorsements at Kamala. And then Kamala ended up getting trounced, which nobody ever wants to mention that. But that was all because the higher ups in the Democratic Party thought they knew better than even their own people. So if we're being honest about democracy being crushed, and who crushed it, maybe your own side crushed democracy for the Democrats. And until you actually are willing to admit that, until you are actually willing to acknowledge that and work on that and make it so that it doesn't happen moving forward, I don't think that a lot of people are going to believe in the Democratic Party.
You know, the policy now of using anti-woke to dismantle the liberal democratic state is something you didn't shut up about.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe it wasn't the same thing. Oh, I just wanted to say the art. Yeah, so that's who I'm talking about. And look, you know, I think a lot of them were just like wanted to land on the side where they could earn a living.
Tony and Joe were both making plenty of money. Most of the comics that would have benefited from that, if it was just about that, were already making plenty of money. When it comes to Austin specifically, is it lazy in the amount that people use words like retard or it or some of the other things that they do? Yeah, most definitely. And it's something that I talked about when I was actively on the scene, and I would talk to some of the newer comics about. But it's also because everybody's more wanting to be shocked and wanting to get seen on Kill Tony. So nobody's really worried about stand-up because they're all trying to get a minute instead of getting an act, which is what an actual stand-up does, because Tony has become too much of a 5 minutes of fame type of thing. And there used to be more of a benefit to that than there is now. Now it's almost like you have to be a regular to get any special treatment. But there was a point where just being on Kill Tony or just showing up on Kill Tony would get you a certain amount of clout and get you some spots and get you some special treatment. But when he says, like, say the R word, obviously retard, or maybe he meant rape, whichever he means, I know what he's getting at. If he's talking in the comedy context, if he's talking about politics in general, I don't think that that was the reason a lot of people were doing that, even though people did want to go back to freedom of speech, which we really didn't have a lot of. But when it comes to comedy, yeah, it has gotten lazy as far as using those words as saves. And when I was on the Austin scene actively, I would see people use that to save a joke or save them from where they were, because they'd be bombing and then they'd be like, well, I look like a retard right now, and people would start laughing, and that's all it took. And it was like, okay, that wasn't really a joke. That was just you saying retard, or that was just you saying fat. And I don't get offended. I don't care. But it's not funny. I mean, like, it's not a joke.
You know, it's challenging.
For years, Joe Rogan has acted like the small guy that the media likes to pile on top of, as if he was the victim, just because he wasn't allowed to make jokes about marginalized groups. But now that they've sort of won that small victory with Trump, they can't play the victim card anymore. Also, in this next clip, Mark plainly states again that whenever a Rogan guy makes a joke punching down at trans or gay people or anything of that nature, that it's simply just hack.
Yeah, when that particular crowd does it, but that doesn't mean that people shouldn't be able to do it all together, which I will remind you is what I said was a huge problem with alt comedy. And when people like Marc Maron were in charge or doing better or getting paid attention to more, or the predominant thinking in stand-up comedy, was all of those words or all of the uses of those words were considered equal. So if you said a trans joke, but it was nuanced and it was actually from the perspective of a person that has a lot of exposure to that community, it would be treated the same as if you were a person that was using it in maybe a not hateful but less educated or less experienced sort of way. And same with words like or retard. Nothing could ever be a joke with those particular words or that kind of thought. So yeah, I get what you're saying, but at the same time, it shouldn't be an all or nothing situation. It really should be based on whether or not it's funny. And the only way to do that is to let it actually play out and see what the audience comes back with towards it. And that's how comedians learn. If nobody laughs, then people will stop saying the stuff that they're saying. There's no better punishment than an audience just not responding or just not laughing and genuinely doing so, not because of shame, but just because they're like, okay, that just wasn't funny. I'm not going to laugh at it. I'm not offended. I don't care that you said it, but I'm not going to humor it. And so if I had to choose between Joe and Tony's way or Marc Maron's way, I would definitely choose Joe and Tony's way, because at least they're willing to let you say it and let the audience react. They'll be picky about where you do say it though, because they can't take that heat.
And it's only offensive because of how unfunny it is.
And in that thing, it's at a point now where it's like you don't have the victim position anymore. You have the dominant position. So why keep kicking? Because it's hackneyed.
See, that's where American Redact doesn't understand comedy again, or the way that comedy actually works, when he says, and it's only offensive because of how hack it is. That's not the way that it worked. They would literally get mad at you no matter how original it was. I remember one time getting the light on an AIDS joke that I did as a gay man about dating guys that were HIV positive. And that turned out to be, at a point, once I got it worked out, be one of my biggest jokes. But I was in an alt room, and the girl that was running the show, who doesn't do stand-up anymore, decided that it was offensive that I was talking about that. So she lit me early, even though it was a regular sign-up open mic where I had gotten there super early and I had just come off the road with Joe Coy and I wanted to really work on this joke, and it was absolutely killing. This is an actual open mic and I'm killing, and you don't a lot of times kill at open mics. I've killed at plenty of open mics, just being 100% honest, but I was really destroying it. And then I got into this joke, and it was because it was a joke as I was working on, and then I got lit. And it turned into an argument between me and her because I would always time my sets. I had a stopwatch. So I knew that I wasn't anywhere close to needing to get the light. It was like a 5-minute set, and she lit me at 3 minutes because she was offended, and she made that face like she was annoyed, and I wasn't allowed to talk about it. And so it wasn't like American Redact thinks it is, or the way that Mark is trying to portray it right now, where it was selective. If it's funny, then we'll let you do it, or we won't give it a hard time or think it's hack. But if it's not funny or it's not well thought out, then this is not true, what he's saying, to the way that alt comedy worked in practice.
That, you walk through a comedy club, or you go to some in certain cities where it's like there's a prerequisite to do a trans joke. There's a prerequisite to do an R-word joke. There's a prerequisite to push the edge in a very non-risky way.
Yeah, well, welcome to comedy, Mark. When you actually get out there in the streets, there are people competing to be edgier than others and to come up with the best take. And it's like Patrice O'Neal said, a good joke and a bad joke both come from the same place. So if you don't like it, then just don't be out in comedy. But you're really not out in the streets like that anyway. So I don't even know why he cares, other than the fact that people are making more money than him. And there was a culture war and Mark's side lost. That's what it's about. He's a sore loser because he's irrelevant when it comes to actual stand-up. And I always say this, even about Joe Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe and a lot of people. It's like these people can make as much money as they want to make, but in their heart, they all want to be actual stand-ups and they want to be good at stand-up, but they're not. And nothing will make them good at stand-up except for actually putting in the time and going to these places where nobody cares about your name, where nobody knows who you are, where they just put comedy on the door or on their marquee or the sign that shows their specials, and you just show up and you actually kill it for these people that have no idea who you are. And that's how you really get good at stand-up, but nobody ever wants to talk about that because all anybody wants to talk about is being famous or internet famous or having a podcast. But that's the thing with all of these people, is they're all bitter in different ways, because they all want to be something that they just can't buy. No matter how much money you have, it will not just make you funny. It will make some people laugh at you. It will make people be excited that you show up and treat you like a celebrity that just showed up. But when it comes to actual stand-up, it will not make you good at stand-up. And that's what bothers Marc Maron, because he has had a fair amount of financial success. WTF was a huge podcast. He made plenty of money. He had Barack Obama on. So how can you have Barack Obama on your podcast and not be worried about that? But then all of a sudden, when somebody chooses to have Donald Trump or somebody you don't agree with, now it's a problem. So when you were doing it, it was okay. But as soon as it's Trump and you don't like Trump and you don't agree with his politics, now it's a huge problem.
Yeah. To not push a boundary, but act like you are. Just
yeah, and act like your voice is somehow dangerous.
Yeah.
There's nothing less dangerous. It's boring.
Your comedy is boring, Marc Maron. Don't ever call anybody boring again when you're as boring as you are. At least they're trying their best to be edgelords, even if they're not really good at it. But you are, without a doubt, one of the most boring comedians I have ever seen reach any kind of success in my 22 years in stand-up, and that is not me exaggerating at all. You are really, 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 literally fall asleep boring and have the nerve to call others boring. Not buying it. Not letting you gaslight me.
Yeah. To say what people want you to say is not doing it. You're not transgressing.
Those particular people.
Yeah.
See, those particular people, because that's all the alt scene was. It really was trying to please a particular audience and giving that audience exactly what they wanted. Like everything this nerd is saying right here in this Vulture interview is really describing what the alt scene really was. It really was just giving people exactly what they wanted, exactly what they expected, and acting like, I'm doing it. You weren't doing it, unless doing it was bombing.
So pretty much for years, everyone thought that Marc Maron hated Joe Rogan and was just jealous of him. Because up until now, most of his critiques for Rogan were pretty surface level. Like he resented Rogan's athletic background, his overwhelming success, and had an ongoing podcast rivalry with him. Rogan was almost like the more popular version of Maron.
Because he did. He really was just hating. Like Marc Maron is one person that was literally hating. There's no two ways about it when it comes to Joe Rogan. And I get it. I really do get it that it's got to be hard to have somebody that's as bad as Joe Rogan be better than you at not one but two different things. And then you also see them as intellectually inferior and they're still better than you at two different things. So don't try to make it anything other than it is. And it's not like the rest of the world, and especially the comedy world, is suddenly coming to this epiphany that Marc Maron was right all along. A lot of us have known that Joe Rogan is shit, just like we knew that Marc Maron was shit. They're bullshit, and that's what it is. Stop trying to make it seem like Marc Maron turned out to be right. Game recognized game. So Marc Maron knew Rogan was shit because Marc Maron is shit. Birds of a feather shit together.
And Maron actually confronted Joe on these very issues all the way back in 2011, which at the time felt as if Marc were simply just jealous of Joe.
You know, when I first saw you, I had this problem with guys who were, athletically oriented. Or had some sort of athletic nature about them before they came into comedy. And I remember that you and Kevin Flynn, he was like a soccer guy.
Yeah.
And you were a kickboxing champion. And there was part of me that was like, this is not for them. This is not their world. Why are they here? Why don't they stay in their competitive world?
Yeah, Marc Maron, why don't people like you stay in the academic world? That's the way funny people feel about people like you. Like, okay, we get it. You're a nerd. You've read a lot of books. You probably went to college. That doesn't make you funny. So why don't you stay in that world? The same way you think athletic people should stay in the athletic world, we feel that way about people like you and the scholastic world. And I know that I speak for the entire funny, whether they're intelligent or unintelligent, or athletic or non-athletic or disabled or black or any marginalized community, because funny comes in all different shapes, colors, and levels of physical ability. So it is what it is. Funny is funny no matter what. And I can tell you that a lot of funny people feel like anybody that's not that should be out. And at least when he was younger, like I said, Rogan was funny. And even now he can make his audience laugh. With you, Marc Maron, yeah, you can make certain audiences laugh, but you're just not consistently funny. People will laugh at you because they agree with you and they know it's a polite thing to laugh at the professor when he tells a joke.
Oh, that's silly.
Well, of course it's silly. But you were sort of a cocky then, weren't you?
I don't know. I mean, first of all, if you're not around someone like that and all of a sudden you're around some guy and you hear this guy's a martial arts champion and now he's doing comedy,
yeah,
I would probably feel the same thing. Like, this is guy invading our spot and ruining our vibe.
That's true. Rogan can ruin a vibe. And I'm not just being catty. Rogan really can ruin a vibe. He's just a real buzzkill of a person when it really comes down to it. Because he always wants to get deep and he always wants to be the center of attention. Like when it comes to talking, he'll just talk and talk and talk about anything like he's an expert. And sometimes you feel like, don't you talk for 4 hours at a clip when you do your podcast? Do you really have anything to talk about now? Or are you just talking because you want to hear your own voice?
In this podcast, Marc also admitted that he felt that Joe doing Fear Factor disqualified him from being a comedy authority, implying that doing a show so out of sync with thoughtful or serious comedy should have knocked Rogan off any moral or artistic high ground.
Nobody should ever look at Joe Rogan as a comedy authority, and I don't know why anybody ever has. And I would say that people like that are probably at least a little bit slow or in some way mentally disabled, especially after his most recent Netflix special. If you did see that, and I'm not just trying to beat a dead horse, but if you did see that, then you know that Joe Rogan is not at all a judge of comedy. So if anybody's under that impression, that really is your own fault. You're lying to yourself, or more importantly, you probably know him and you're trying to lie to him if you're really going with that.
Your television career, not news radio particularly, but Fear Factor was antithetical to, who you are now. And that I thought it was hard for me to accept that you were able to stand in a position of judgment of what comedy is or isn't, having done Fear Factor and the impact it had on the comedy business and television.
That's the way the rest of us feel after watching you do a set, Marc Maron, that it really is a ballsy thing for you to have opinions on stand-up comedy, being as bad at it as you are. So the same way you feel about Joe is the way all of us feel about you.
So after that 2011 interview, a lot of fans of the podcast came to the conclusion that Marc was just jealous of Joe. But now, fast forward to 2025.
Fast forward to 2025, and we all know that that's right, that that's true. And not only is Marc jealous of Joe, he's also jealous of everybody else. Like I said, Jeff Dye, Matt Rife, back in the day, Dane Cook. Like, who isn't Marc Maron jealous of in stand-up comedy? Like, I don't know how it seems like to the guy from American Redact that this has changed or that something's different now. No, now we're sure that he is a hater of anybody that's actually better at or making more money at something than he is. Because in some of these cases, they're not actually good. They're just better than him. They're making a lot more money than him, but they're still not good at what it is he wants to be good at. So it really is just financial success and influence that seems to be Marc Maron's hang-up.
And it almost seems like Marc's criticisms of Joe are becoming more valid by the day.
Yeah, well, a lot of people have been saying it, like I already said, so I don't know why it's all of a sudden seeming like so important because it's coming from Marc Maron. Are we pretending Marc Maron's brave?
His beef with Joe Rogan has taken a new level of depth. Like it started as a personal rivalry, but now it's evolved into this broader cultural clash, with both these guys representing two very different versions of what comedy should be.
No, they're actually representing two different versions of what comedy should not be, is what they are. They may think that they're what comedy should be, and there may be certain people that would like to believe that they're what comedy should be. But make no mistake about it, Joe Rogan and Marc Maron are two different versions of what comedy should never be and hopefully will come out of all together. But they were necessary steps in order to cancel each other out. And that's why I say that I really do feel like Marc Maron was the reason that Joe Rogan and Tony Hinchcliffe and Matt Rife, for a lot of the stuff that he's complaining about, had to happen because they really were gatekeeping comedy and somebody had to come in and break that up. And at least for that, we can be grateful to Rogan and the Rogansphere. But to pretend like Marc Maron is any kind of savior or actually any kind of truth teller when everything he's doing is very self-serving makes zero sense to me. And it makes me question whether it's that American Redact just agrees with what he's saying or agrees with him politically, so he's trying to paint it that way, or if he's just that clueless when it comes to stand-up and what good stand-up comedy is and what good stand-up comedy should look like and the level of not only freedom of speech but freedom of thought that it takes to actually be a good comic. So I'm just going to go ahead and leave it there. That's where I'm at on it. Let me know what you think down below in the comments. Sorry this was a long one, but I had a lot to say, obviously. Hope you enjoyed. As always, thank you for watching. This has been Ty Rivera, the absolute best LGBTQ comedian in the world.
They bought into his bullshit.